echo in your head. There's a strange vibration rising out from the heart of America, America. Listen to the sound of the drum calling players to the game of the new world order. Don't be caught unaware when the heads start rolling. No, it couldn't happen here. I know it wouldn't happen here. But I will not submit to authority of man. I'm alive, I'm awake. This is more than I can take. If you had an open door, would you kill a little more? Listen to the cries of the dead in the wake of the Sudan. Is there no one out there? I see blood in the sands of despair in Africa. Listen to the sound of applause in a chamber full of men selling out their people as they plan their assault on the heart of America. No, it couldn't happen here. I know it never happened here. I will not submit to authority of man. I'm alive, I'm awake. This is more than I can take.
Okay, welcome everybody to the July 16th edition of Double Crossed Radio, coming to you live from the heart of freedom, and that is my office studio. Hi, I'm Chuck Horton, your host tonight, and we got some history for you, some current events that relate to history, some economics, some Greece banking news, some peeks into the future, one small Donald Trump comment, and maybe a comment, and then maybe a teaser for a future show, which we hope to have another guest who's far more interesting than I am. And you'll have to hang on to the end of the show to find out who that's going to be. But it's going to be a big one. I'll promise you that. I wanted to also send out another public thank you to Jeff Berwick for being on our show. That was about a month ago now, three or 4 weeks ago. Jeff was just amazing, and he also recorded the show and then rebroadcast it on his network, which has a much bigger following than UCY's, but that's okay. Jeff is a promoter, and he's kind of a big name out there. A lot of people are tuned into his stuff. And that show has become our highest rated show, or highest listened to show of all time. And I'm very excited by that, the potential that's out there. That we were actually approaching maybe being competitive with MSNBC and some of their dog programs. And they have cable news networks all over the place, and they're really syndicated, and they're everywhere, but hardly anyone watches them. So this is a small time show being done out of my bedroom converted into an office. I'm standing over here staring at my closet. That's my dirty clothes hamper and my hang-up clothes, and I'm building a new desk. So soon I'm going to be coming to you from a bedroom office with a new desk, instead of sitting on at a chair and looking at a computer monitor that's sitting on top of a table. And this is kind of a makeshift broadcast venue here, but it's working. And we would really want to thank all of you who are tuned in. I'm going to start out today with I just read this actually a couple weeks ago, but I didn't have time to, actually it wasn't that long ago. I think this was written maybe a little while ago, but it was posted in Town Hall just today. And I could have sworn I had read it somewhere else, or maybe I heard Dr. Williams speaking on a talk show or something, but I'd heard a lot of this before, but he put it into words. And those of you who don't know who Walter Williams is, he occasionally, first of all, he's the former chairman of the Department of Economics at George Mason University. He is, I wouldn't call him an Austrian economist, but he's very sympathetic to many of the Austrian views. He might be a de facto Austrian in the fact that he holds many of those views himself. And I don't think he has very many fundamental differences with the Austrians. If there are any, it probably is dealing with the aspect of money, and that's where most, I would say, classical economists have a little bit of a division with the Austrian school. Is that Milton Friedman was an awesome economist, but according to the Austrians, he just really missed the boat on money, and so that's where a lot of them do. But I think Walter Williams may be closer to the Austrians than Milton Friedman was in that respect. Well, I don't want to get off on a tangent. Anyway, in the Town Hall column that is posted here from Walter Williams, he's talking about. I'll just read it. It's short. It won't take very long, and I think you'll understand what it's about. But it's about history, and it's about histories being rewritten so that they can advance certain political agendas. And let's see if you agree with Dr. Williams or not. By the way, Dr. Williams is a frequent guest host or he used to be, on the Rush Limbaugh show. That's where I first heard of him, and I couldn't believe this guy was so good at expressing economic concepts in everyday language that anybody could understand, and I just fell in love with the man. I consider him one of the great Americans that lived during my lifetime, and so every time he writes something, I always try and get a chance to read, and sometimes they're just so over the top, full of great information that I want to share them, and this is one of those. And I read from the column. The victors of war write its history in order to cast themselves in the most favorable light. That explains the considerable historical ignorance about the War of 1861 and panic over the Confederate flag. To create better understanding, we have to start a bit before 1787 Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. Now, why would we have to start before? I'm taking an aside here. Why would we have to start before 1787? Perhaps it'd be that the Revolutionary War did not, or had ended. Actually, it ended in 1781, 6 years prior to that, and it was officially declared and ended in a Treaty of Paris in 1783. So there were actually six between 1781 and 1787. The United States was bound by a union of independent sovereign states, and they were a confederacy. And they were governed by the Articles of Confederation. And they had actually 6 presidents prior to George Washington being elected after the 1787 Constitutional Convention. So there were 6 presidents before Washington under the Articles of Confederation. And that is just swept under the rug in most history classes. They don't talk about it. So back to the article. The 1783 Treaty of Paris ended the war between the colonies and Great Britain. Its first article declared the 13 colonies to be free, sovereign, and independent states. These 13 sovereign nations came together in 1787 as principals and created the federal government as their agent. Principals have always held the right to fire agents. In other words, states held the right to withdraw from the pact, a term which we would call secede. So all you out there that are I'm once again going aside from this, all of you out there in the State of Jefferson movement think that is not secession. Man, you guys don't understand what the word means. It's secession, okay? It doesn't mean you're racist. It doesn't mean you hate blacks. It doesn't mean anything other than you want to dissolve the pact between you and the state of California. And that is secession. Okay, back to the article. During the 1787 Constitutional Convention, a proposal was made that would allow the federal government to suppress a seceding state. James Madison, he's the author of the Constitution, rejected it, saying a union of states containing such an ingredient seemed to provide for its own destruction. The use of force against a state would look more like a declaration of war than an infliction of punishment, and would probably be considered by the party attacked as a dissolution of all previous compacts by which it might be bound. Exactly. In fact, the ratification documents of Virginia, New York, Rhode Island explicitly said, and I'll say it again, explicitly said, they held the right to resume powers delegated should the federal government become abusive of those powers. The Constitution never would have been ratified if states thought they could not regain their sovereignty, or, in another word, secede. See, it's not a bad word, guys. It's actually a word that we should be proud of. We are in a country that was formed by a group of colonies that seceded from Great Britain. My Lord, can't you guys read a little history once in a while? Okay, back to the article. On March 2nd, 1861, after 7 states seceded, and 2 days before Abraham Lincoln's inauguration, Senator James R. Doolittle of Wisconsin proposed a constitutional amendment that read, "No state or any part thereof heretofore admitted or hereafter admitted into the Union shall have the power to withdraw from the jurisdiction of the United States." Now, in those days, communication was not instantaneous as it is today. The election was held in November 1860, and Lincoln was elected, and there was some negotiating going on between states and Lincoln prior to his inauguration, which was held on March 2nd. So that was almost 5 months from the election. And just prior to his being inaugurated, these 7 states decided that this man he had an iron will, and he would not bend to their demands, and they had no other avenue to proceed other than to secede from the Union. 7 months earlier, Representatives Daniel Sickles of New York, Thomas B. Florence of Pennsylvania, and Otis S. Ferry of Connecticut proposed a constitutional amendment to prohibit secession. Here's a question for the reader. Would there have been any point to offering these amendments if secession were already unconstitutional? Ta-da! That's a question for thinking people. On the eve of war, 1861, even Unionist politicians saw secession as a right of states. Representative Jacob M. Kunkel of Maryland said, "Any attempt to preserve the union between the states of this confederacy by force would be impractical and destructive of Republican liberty." We don't mean Republican as in Republican Party, because I think they've forgotten what their name stands for as well. So, you can find this column at townhall.com under Walter E. Williams. And there are several links to historical documents that he links to in his article, and they're just fabulous. And I thought that this, just a quick, brief summary of some historical facts, and people are getting all hysterical about Confederate flags, and they think it's racist and everything else. It has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with someone having the power to rule their own lives. And I think that's the same thing you guys in Siskiyou County were trying to do when you had your Jefferson state of Jefferson movement going. I really personally preferred the Jefferson Republic idea because it was more of a true breaking from the power structure that's imprisoning us and enslaving us. But regardless, that was their actions. The 7 southern states were exactly the same actions that you're taking. And, some of them may have had wrong reasons for doing the right thing, but remember that even when you're even when you're protecting the right of somebody who's doing something that you consider to be abhorrent or just an evil, to prohibit that action may end up prohibiting actions that you wish to take. And I think a further consequence is this prohibiting of that secession set up a union that was with a central government that was so powerful that eventually it has engulfed. Until about 150 years, it has taken over a free republic and turned it into an empire run by an elite few and controlled by corporate interests. And none of that would have been possible had they just minded their own business and let people do as they wish to do. As a further aside and some more history, the United States was the only nation that I'm aware of in the 19th century that ended slavery with a war that cost the lives of over 750,000 people. Only 600,000 of those people were soldiers. 150,000 civilians perished in this war. Talk about war crimes. And they were almost all living in the South. I tell you, if the South had prevailed and won this war, Sherman, Sheridan, and Lincoln all would have hung as war criminals. And I don't think history would have, because the victors get to write the history, I don't think history would have shown the South as being evil in doing so, because the acts that Sherman, Sheridan, and Lincoln perpetrated on the South were they were beyond the pale. They were horrible. Okay, enough of our history lesson today. I hope that you all will be intrigued by this and to follow those links and to read them, learn some history for yourself. I tell you, the lessons of history are they're provided at great expense. And people's lives are lost, and they're there for us to witness, observe, to find ways to learn from these examples, and it's free. All you have to do is read about it. Just spend some time. Okay, next up, just a current events thing that I thought was kind of interesting. As you may or may not be aware, Google has a whole fleet of self-driving cars that they're putting out on the roads, and they're test driving them, seeing what the accident rates are, seeing what they're basically doing a beta test of their product, because I think this is being planned for everybody who wants to travel by car is going to have to do it in a car that is dependent on the internet, a car that can be taken over from outside, a car that will keep you from going to destinations that are not approved, and a car that will basically be your prison away from prison. But this is interesting. They're supposed to have a higher or a safer driving record in all this, but they keep on being involved in accidents. And to be fair, most of these accidents are from other cars' faults. But this is from, this was where was this? This was a USA Today article, and it was today as well. Picture the sad sack who has a sign saying "Kick me" taped to his back. That's so 20th century. Google's self-driving cars can relate, only the sign seems to say "hit me" or "rear-end me." Okay, so they have a gadget-packed Lexus. It's been hit twice in the rear bumper while waiting at stop signs in the Mountain View, California area. So Google reported that on July 1st, a motorist smashed into its stationary autonomous vehicle at 17 miles per hour, resulting in minor whiplash to passengers in both cars. So they actually had a passenger in the driverless car. Wow. We're seeing firsthand the true measure how distraction impacted driving. Of how distraction is impacting driving. That's the Google spokesman said. None of our accidents rise to the level of police reports, so what we're experiencing is what the road is really like. No, you're not quite there. I just can't wait for the first road rage on a Google car. That is going to be what the road is really like. So, anyway, that just is an interesting comment. That stories like this, I think they're maybe reported locally, and if it weren't for things like the Drudge Report, maybe USA Today, just because they thought it's a funny story or whatever, people would not ever be exposed to the fact that this is the future. And it isn't really a pretty picture. It's like cashless society. This is a future that's being designed to imprison you. And I just hope that every time someone brings up the concept of a driverless car, that you kind of remember this night's show. You remember you maybe have a link to it. You tell your friends to listen to this. You maybe go find the article and bookmark it so you can go back and show it, send it around to your email buddies or paste it on your Facebook page. It's not going to be a perfect world for sure. And if, I kind of read between the lines in there and there wasn't anything in between the lines, but I'm kind of thinking that they're suggesting that if all the cars were autonomous cars, driverless cars, these accidents wouldn't be happening. The accidents they're mostly the fault of the drivers, but I don't think any of them have. Well, I don't think any of these accidents have been more than just a rear ending or something like that. And they are distracted driving. People are texting on their phone or reading something or I don't know, whatever they do to distract themselves. But it's I think the push and the reason this thing made the paper is because there's a spin on it that maybe perhaps all cars should be like the Google car. Okay, enough for that current event story. Next up is another story. This was actually published on the 13th. That was that Sunday or Monday? Oh, whatever, on the 13th. And this was a story about Dinesh D'Souza. Now, a lot of you probably don't know who Dinesh D'Souza is. And this was first written in the WorldNet Daily, which I highly endorse. I don't agree with much of what they say. I mean, there's parts of it that I do like very much. And they often have a pretty good analysis of what's happened. Their suggestions for solutions to problems, I think, are a little lame at times, tend to be a little bit mainstream and really don't provide any thinking outside the box or thinking that's maybe historically been a great solution to a problem like we have now. They tend to rely on the more recent uses of government power and things that never seem to work very well as the things that should be done, and maybe a little bit political in their tone at times. But I still think they're a really good news source in that they do try and write stories that don't have a lot of suggestion in them. They're much less than that USA Today article I just read about the Google cars. Oh, I like how I say that, Google cars. Okay, so Dinesh D'Souza, for those of you who don't know, he's a best-selling author. He wrote to this date, I believe, the highest-grossing documentary film. He wrote and produced the highest-grossing, revenue-grossing documentary film of all time. I believe it was called America. It was very critical of Barack Obama. During a recent election cycle, and I don't remember, I think it was the 2012 election cycle, he formed a political action committee and raised $30,000 for a college friend of his who was running for, I believe it was a state office or it may have been a state representative to Congress. I think it was more of a state office, though, in Connecticut. I think that's what it was. You can look up the details. It's in Wikipedia. And he failed to file all the proper paperwork. didn't have the proper accounting, and so he was given a 5-year suspended sentence, and he was put in a kind of a house arrest where he has some things he can do during the day, but he's must stay in his house in the evenings. During the day, he can do things like go to a doctor appointment, go to groceries and stuff like that, but he can't go out and do business and whatever. He has to maintain or stay in his house. And he was sentenced, he had to do community service during that time. Well, he was also ordered to see a court-appointed psychiatrist to see if he was depressed. I think they wanted to get him on some antidepressants so they could get him under mind control. Yeah, turn him into a mass shooter. Yeah, that would really put a hole in the freedom movement. But anyway, he had two different court-appointed psychologists look at him. They said that there was no need to continue the consultation because D'Souza was psychologically normal and well-adjusted. But the judge in the case, Judge Berman, who was appointed by none other than Bill Clinton, who is married to Hillary Clinton, who's now running for president, and served in the Obama administration, who was effectively criticized in Dinesh D'Souza's best-selling documentary movie, disagreed because, of course, his many years as a trained psychologist, being none, made him a much better judge of Dinesh D'Souza's mental state. And he said that, let's get this quote here. He overruled the judgment of the two licensed psychological counselors the U.S. Probation Department had approved as part of D'Souza's criminal sentence. And quote said, "I only insisted on psychological counseling as part of Mr. D'Souza's sentence because I wanted to be helpful. I am requiring Mr. D'Souza to see a new psychological counselor and to continue the weekly psychological consultation, not as a part of his punishment or to be retributive." Yeah, right. Like, we're going to believe that. I believe Mr. D'Souza has to pay for this, and if he doesn't have to pay for it, it's still time out of his day. Let's see. He's become known for his two popular films critical of President Obama, the 2016 film, which was Obama's America, and the 2012, which was the best-selling one of all time, was entitled America, Imagine a World Without Her. And actually, we discussed that film on this show last year after Freedom Fest. It came out in July 2014, and we got to see a preview at Freedom Fest, and we had Dennis Linthicum on. And Dennis and I discussed what the world would be like if America had never existed. And it was kind of speculative. I mean, who knows? But I think there's been a lot of contributions to the cause of liberty that have emanated from the United States. And while we may be failing in that department recently, through the 19th century, America was this golden city on the hill, and it was the place where people who were oppressed could escape to and find freedom and opportunity. And while that started to diminish in the 20th century and finally has been exhausted now, we recently had a house guest who arrived here from Poland seeking to make her fortune in the United States. And she was so disappointed and dissatisfied after about 6 weeks that she went home. She said she had more freedom and opportunity in Poland than is here in the United States, where you just get. And I couldn't argue with her. I told her, unless you have a real in-demand skill, it's going to be tough to get a job that's really worth anything. She understood that after being here for 6 weeks. So Mr. Berman, he continued. He said, "I'm not singling out Mr. D'Souza to pick on him. A requirement for psychological counseling often comes up in my hearings in cases where I find it hard to understand why someone did what they did. Well, man, Mr. Berman, you obviously have never had to deal with being busy in your job or maybe making an independent film and getting it produced and getting it on as many screens as you can, and then having to file all this really inane paperwork in order to be legal. And the fact that he'd never done it before, he omitted a couple forms that he needed to fill in. Well, to me, I don't find that hard to understand at all. Just the other day, I had to fill out an unemployment form. I had to make my own report of what happened. If I don't make a report, then I forfeit my ability to contest the finding of the unemployment department. And the first page had the instructions of where to send the form, and while I was filling it out, I misplaced the first page. I mean, how was that even possible? I couldn't understand how. I have a very small office space at work. I don't know what happened to that piece of paper. I really don't. I looked for it for about 45 minutes. I just finally gave up and called them this morning and says, could you fax me a copy of the first page of this, because I don't know what happened to this. I want to have the complete form, and I want to make sure I send it to the right place. He says, oh, you don't need that. I'll just give you the address. You can send it there. You don't need that first page. Oh, you need it if you don't have the address. But anyway, it was just he didn't get all the things that he needed in, and he didn't know that he had actually made a mistake until it was brought to his attention. This was in the September 23rd sentencing hearing. Berman said he could not understand how someone of D'Souza's intelligence, with credentials that include college president, could do something so stupid as to violate federal campaign contribution laws. D'Souza was at the pinnacle of his career, writing best-selling nonfiction books and producing popular feature films. Huh, yeah. Well, Mr.
to ride.